Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is the first President's Open Forum of the 2013 calendar year. We did have a kind of an impromptu forum last week for the announcement of the accreditation letter that we received, but this is a regularly scheduled time that we normally do our forums. Today I want to cover three topics. One, I want to address again accreditation. Some of you were at the open forum last Thursday morning when we made the announcement. Some of you might have read the materials online. Some of you may have watched the news. Some may have listened to the hallroom chat or the hallway chatter. But I just want to give you the opportunity, especially if you have questions, as to answer your questions and also to clarify what the next steps are and what kind of collateral materials are we going to put into the hands of you and students and other people in our community. The second area I want to touch on is Title IX. If you recall, 3 years ago there was a complaint filed against Cuesta College with the Office for Civil Rights. And that complaint has now been resolved, and I want to give you information on that. And then the third topic has to do with our long-term budget reduction plan. Where are we in the implementation of the 5-year long-term budget reduction plan as spelled out in our response to recommendation 7 of the show cause report? And where are we in that process, and what's the timeline for that? So those are the topics today that I want to address. Okay, so this is the letter that we received last week, the one we were anxiously waiting for. We had not actually received a hard copy when we really needed it. We really needed to see the letter on Wednesday so we could activate our media release and our information to faculty and students before the 4-day weekend, because the Commission was going to be posting the action taken by the Commission on Thursday evening. So if that would have happened, the world would have known before we really had an opportunity to share the outcome with you. When I saw that College of the Redwoods had already posted their letter on their website, and we hadn't, I attributed that to the fact that we don't always get the mail in the same pace that other parts of the country get. So I called the Commission office and they agreed to email me a PDF file of the letter. We did receive it the following day. But the important thing about this letter was that it disappeared. There we go. That the tone of the letter was extremely gratifying in the fact that the nature of the comments that were being made by the Commission were very exemplary of the work that all of you have played in that particular time. So if you look at that second paragraph, it commends the work of the college. We didn't see these kind of statements in previous letters. And I just want to point out how different this letter was than the previous action letters that we received from the Commission. Because the Commission was really conveying to me and to you that they recognized the tremendous accomplishment that this college had made since last February in terms of addressing the issues that were still outstanding, some of which were outstanding since 2002. And of course, what I was scanning through quickly for was that in bold, what the actual action was. And the action was that the Commission voted to take us from show cause and move us to warning, which was really significant. because that really told us we made a quantum leap in terms of improvement and action towards compliance. And as you know, the outstanding thing that we have remaining will be the completion of the implementation of our integrated plan, which will be completed in the spring, May and June, and then the assessment of that process and that plan to measure its effectiveness. We will need to document all of that, and that will become part of what we will be reporting back to in October. So that's the essence of it. This letter is posted online, so if you click on the accreditation button on the front page, go to that letter and spend some time reading it, look at the specific nature of what we're asked to do. It sometimes is a little misleading because every time they say, now you need to finish this recommendation, it's the very same wording of the recommendation that was in the original report. So it goes back to the 2009 action letter, and the language stays the same, but the elements that we have to address are different. And what they've done in this letter is they actually spelled those out a little bit more specifically. And normally they just leave you with a, okay, what do we have to do next? Question still in our mind. So that was really important part. So as we've been spinning the news to the media, this is a huge accomplishment. It's very positive. We were trying to stay away from using the word reaffirmation. Even though that's the technical word, people think that reaffirming something is getting back something you've lost, and we haven't lost anything. We're accredited, we've always been accredited, and you're not accredited unless they take it away from you. So that's part of the message. So that's why in our news release, we use the titling, Cuesta College remains accredited. And that's something that we would hope that all of you can incorporate into your vocabulary as you work with students and your friends and neighbors in the community, or if you're interfacing with potential students that are either in local high schools or on campus asking you questions about the status of the college. We remain accredited, and we will continue to remain accredited. And while we're on sanction, it means we're addressing some issues and problems that we have to correct. And the fact that we've come off a show cause and we're not put on probation but moved clear up to warning was also very significant. College of the Redwoods went from show cause to probation, and they still have significant work that they have to do in this next cycle. City College of San Francisco will not be acted upon until June. The commission meets twice a year, and we're in the January cycle. That institution is on the June cycle. And from all I've read in the San Francisco Chronicle, which isn't always the most reliable measure of reality, they're having some very difficult times across the board, from the Board of Trustees to faculty to staff to administration. And they've got some big challenges. I don't envy them. But I know that they are committed to resolve those issues, and I trust that they too will get past the point of trying to figure out whose fault it was, which I recognized in this institution when I came back in earlier, and getting past the point that whatever happened, and we own the problem. It's our problem, therefore it's our obligation to fix it. And that's the change that I've seen within this institution and across the district, is that we own it, it's our college, it's our district, and we're going to do everything we can to make it the very best that it can be. Because it's a place we want to work and continue to work and serve students in an effective way. So, the next steps. Deb, you want to talk about the next steps? Most of you know Vice President Deb Wulff, who I appointed as the Accreditation Liaison Officer a year ago because we needed some help in leadership, and she and Kevin Bottenball, our Academic Senate President, who's hiding over there in the corner with his hat on, They co-chair the Accreditation Steering Committee and have done an amazing job of galvanizing the work of the college to come together and to get past the impediments that we were facing during that time. So, Deb, step right up.
Okay, thank you. Please. Good afternoon, and ASDC students, I'm sorry you're going to hear a repeat of what Kevin and I just talked about earlier. The next steps, we cannot sit back on our laurels. We have a lot of work to accomplish. We got very good praise for getting to warning. They're starting to believe that we understand what we're doing. So our next steps, we are meeting next week and identifying all of the issues we have to address. We're already in the process of an assessment of our processes for integrated planning, and that will be going out to the committees soon by March. We have to continue monitoring our integrated planning manual and making sure we're doing everything on that and our strategic plan. And Kevin and I and Casey will meet and we'll identify anything that we see that we're missing in that recommendation too. Then Kevin and I will lead a small task group to develop the response. The response will be ready, the first draft will be ready beginning of August, so as soon as faculty come back, we can vet it through the whole process and all the committees, academic senate, etc. So that is our first step on the follow-up, but we really need to be careful to our attention to detail and go above and beyond. So that's, the first step that we're looking at. In conjunction with that, we are working on our 2014 comprehensive self-evaluation. We've identified our teams. The teams are already working. And remember, this is a major report to address everything over the last 6 years. So we have to address the standards, the eligibility requirement, the policies, and the recommendations we've had since the 2008 report. And our planning agendas that we had, in our 2008 and our mid-year report. And so it is going to be Kevin was very modest and said it was going to be about a 300-page, I think it most likely would be about a 400-page report, but it's a huge document that we're undertaking. What I'm excited about is the teams are being very aggressive and they're looking at our gaps, because remember, over the last 6 years we've really been focusing on those recommendations. We haven't been focusing on what are we missing in those standards. And so any gap that's identified, we are galvanized and we're working very quickly to correct it. So if any of you are interested, on the accreditation website, you can find out the information. Kevin and I sent an update at the beginning of this week. You can contact any of those co-chairs if you're interested in volunteering. But again, I was talking with faculty, and Bruce Silverberg, and I've mentioned this several times, and sorry I'm repeating myself, but Bruce Silverberg said, when do we get to slow down? We don't get to slow down. We have 2 more years of very intense work, and we're going to be moving at a very fast rate. And we are becoming a more and more regulated industry, and we have to realize that. ACCJC just sent down 9 new regulations from the Department of Education that we have to address. So we are becoming highly regulated, and we have to adjust. But we will, and we're moving forward. So thank you for all your work. Any questions? Can I ask them if they have questions? No? Great.
So some of the, about an hour ago, an email went out from my office of materials that have been produced by our marketing unit in order to put into your hands and in our students' hands about the facts related to accreditation that we hope that you will be able to utilize both internally and externally in your communications. So this is a statement that is actually It's actually my message that I'll be using primarily externally. I'm working with the county superintendents of schools to gain access to their best communication tool to address parents of juniors and seniors that are in our local high schools, so that we can hopefully curtail this myth about what sanction means. Since we've been on sanction, there's an assumption that when we're on sanction that your courses and our units won't count for things. And so it's influencing people's decision about which schools they choose to go to. Current students who are here are making decisions about whether they choose to stay here or not, or to move on some other place. And we have identified 3 areas that we know that being under the accreditation cloud have affected. One is student enrollment. Not all the loss in student enrollment is because of the number of classes that we reduce. That has a huge part to it. But we also know that we've lost more students at a faster rate than the number of hours of instruction that we've lost. So we've lost enrollment. There's a bleeding, there's a leakage of enrollment. We also know that it has affected our applicant pools for jobs. That if you were someplace else in California and you had a strong desire to move to the Central Coast, which is a common behavior in California, and you saw that Cuesta College had a job open, but you saw that we were on show cause, or we were on probation, or were we on some kind of sanction, you might say that, that might not be the career opportunity I want to consider, because if I get there and it closes, then I've really made a poor investment. So we know that it does temper some individuals' attitudes about seeking employment. The other place that we've noticed that it's had an impact is on donor solicitation. We depend a great deal on private gift support for the college through our foundation. It doesn't seem to have affected our current donors. Our current donors are pretty locked into the commitment, the passion, and the mission of Cuesta College. But when you approach a new donor and they're considering where they want to invest their resources, they want to invest them in a good commodity of some sort, just as if they were investing on the stock market. They don't want to throw their money down the drain. And if they invest $100,000 to Cuesta College and we close a year later, that's a bad investment for them. Okay. So we know that accreditation sanction does have an impact. Those are the consequences of being on sanction. And that's why we're moving so quickly as we can in order to remove those particular areas. Another piece that we have is an FAQ. This is primarily geared towards students. You've probably seen this. We had one like it in the last cycle. But in this case, we are looking at something got really small. Let me click on it again. Let me get it back. Oop. Green. What? The plus sign. Oh, there you go. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, this is the common questions that we get about what is accreditation, what is this mystery beast in the sky, the commission, because they're taking a lot of hits. There are a lot of people are pointing the finger at the commission as being the bad guys. They're not the bad guys. They're the enforcers. They're the enforcers of standards that are established by the United States Department of Education. And as Vice President Wulff said, we are becoming more and more regulated. We're no different than the banking industry and the healthcare industry, that the regulations are being tightened up in order to assure that we're producing a product that enhances the lives of students who choose to come here. So we're being regulated. And what's the hammer? The hammer is federal funding, is federal financial aid, which is the largest part of what the federal government puts into public higher education. And without accreditation, you lose the ability to accept public funding. So not only federal funding, but also state funding. So virtually you go out of business unless you suddenly can privatize your operation. And it talks about, is Cuesta College accredited? And this is where we want to emphasize the remain accredited. What does it mean to be on a sanction? Yeah. And what's our current sanction? So we want to clarify that we're on warning, what that means, etc. And then what's the impact? The sequence of what happens, but what's the impact for students? The impact for students is there is no impact. While we're unsanctioned, there is no impact on students. It doesn't affect their financial aid. It doesn't affect their course credits and how they're perceived by a transfer institution. So we want to get that message across in as clear a manner as we possibly can. And then, I think this is the one we haven't seen. And then there's a poster. The poster, we really want to get some key points that come across very quickly as to what the things we want people to see right away. And of course, Cuesta remains accredited. That's our mantra. That's the thing that we want to make sure. And to students, this is our classes will still transfer. There's no problem with that. And of course, you can still get your degrees and certificates. Financial aid remains safe. And then some other information about kind of the status of what happened and where we are and et cetera. And then the bottom line statement for students. And we just want to reassure them that nothing else, that we can't go wrong in that area. So hopefully that you'll print these off. These are on your website now. They were sent out as an email from my office. So distribute those. Keep a set with you, so when you go to Albertsons or New Frontier or McClintock's or Slow Brew, wherever you go, you can do that. Okay. Any questions on accreditation? The response in the community has been wonderful, and I hope people have stopped you or talked to you and say, hey, it's great news about what I hear about Cuesta College. A lot of them think we're clear. They saw remains accredited, and so they didn't read beyond the headline and say we're still on warning. I just let it go. And because the more they think we are fully compliant with all the issues, the better. There's less speculation, less doubt. But I hope you can soak up some of that good feeling, because people really do care about you. They care about the work you do. They care about the work we do as an institution. And they care about the education our students get, because that's our future. That's the future of our county, our state, and our nation and the world, is what we do with these students. All right, let's turn our attention now to Title IX. Title IX was an amendment put into law in 1972, which really put into law the commitment by public entities about creating equal access and opportunity to gender, for disabilities, and a variety of other protected categories. Where it's received, where it's misperceived it's misperceived that it only applies to athletics. But that's not the case. It applies to every educational program that we offer. So when we have a nursing program and all we see are women in the nursing program, we could have a complaint filed against Cuesta College for not addressing and not accommodating the needs of male students who desire to be registered nurses. Or in our engineering program, if we had a predominance of male students enrolled in our engineering program, and we found out that there were a high degree of female students who were interested in engineering, but for some reason they were not able to get access to the class, you could be out of compliance with Title IX. But where it's most prevalently seen and the media picks up on is in intercollegiate athletics. And it doesn't just apply to the college setting. Title IX affects it at all levels of public education. At the K-12 level, at community colleges and universities and colleges throughout the country. So back in 1992, we had an OCR complaint filed at Cuesta College by one of our part-time coaches, who was a volleyball coach at the time, and a women's volleyball coach, and he filed a complaint charging the fact that our female student athletes did not have equal access to full-time coaches. You have to understand that his motivation was he wanted a full-time job. And so he wasn't getting anywhere through our normal process, and so he used the avenue of going to the Office for Civil Rights and filing a complaint. OCR picked up that complaint, and they started an investigation. And when they pick up a complaint, they just don't necessarily address that complaint. They have the opportunity to open up all the elements of Title IX affecting athletics. They look at facilities, they look at travel policy, they looked at uniform replacement policies, they looked at per diem, they look at coaches' salaries, they look at how people are compensated. So our athletic director at the time, Warren Hansen, and myself, I was the dean of science and mathematics at the time, which I had athletics under my purview. We were in charge of doing that data gathering for the investigative team. Well, to make a long story short, after they reviewed all the data, they came on campus and they interviewed folks. They walked away and said that the complaint was frivolous. It was not a compliance issue because our full-time faculty who are coaches have a portion, 50% of their teaching load devoted to that sport. A part-time faculty head coach has 50% assignment to that sport. So the student athletes have exactly the same portion of workload, whether it's a full-time coach or a part-time coach. So OCR threw that out. But in the meantime, they opened up a whole can of worms. And that is, some of you were here during the early 90s, where the men's faculty and staff locker room is, that was the women's staff and locker room. And where the women's staff and faculty locker room is, that was the men's. And that whole south end of the 1000 building was the team room for men's sports. Because when that building was built, we had no women's sports. That was before we introduced them. So we had to do a whole facility remodel. So we moved people around. The PE locker room was turned into the men's team room and so on. So we made a lot of modifications structurally at a time when we didn't have much money, but we were forced to do it because of as part of our compliance plan. So now we roll forward now, and also our compliance plan included bringing on more opportunities for women, and so we added women's water polo. We also added what was the other one we added, Bob? Soccer. We added soccer, then we added women's water polo, and so we currently have 8 women's sports and 7 men's sports in our program. Now we did have 9 until 2009. And if you recall, 2009-10 was the first big budget hit that we had. And so we were scrambling the college was scrambling at that time to come up with the necessary reductions. And athletics had a charge of reducing costs. And we also had 2 sport teams, women's softball and women's tennis, who were without coaches. One coach had retired and one coach had resigned. The recruitment for those coaches was not fruitful. We had either no pool or very shallow pools. So then the question says, can we really sustain these programs? The tennis team had actually 3 student athletes coming back from that team, so in looking at the two sports, the sport having the least impact at that time would have been women's tennis. And so Dean Wulff at the time made a recommendation to the president, Dr. Pelham, that we should suspend women's tennis. Sorry, Deb. Suspend women's tennis. And that was a cost savings of about $30,000 in order to support the general fund portion of that program. That was the suspension for a year. Yeah. And so that recommendation was accepted by the president. It was built into the budget reduction plan, and it was put into place. Well, around December of 2009, the retired tennis coach was upset that the program was eliminated after he had worked 20 years to build it to a very, very, very good program. And so he and a student athlete and a Title IX evangelist from the Valley all filed complaints with OCR. And that happened in January 19th of 2010. So we were approached by the Office for Civil Rights to generate all the data around our sports program. And within the compliance provisions, there are three ways in which you can be compliant in athletics. One is a process called proportionality, which is really the measuring of the ratio of male to female student athletes to the ratio of full-time male and female students. And if those numbers are called, if they reach what's called substantial proportionality, then you meet the test for compliance. A second one is if you have a history of showing continual improvement of the underrepresented gender, and we had that going for a while. We had added women's soccer, we had women's water polo. If we would have continued that trend, especially if the women athletes were still the underrepresented gender in that progress, then we could have met compliance because of the effort we had shown towards that. But we had stopped that several years ago. And the third one was to accommodate the interests and abilities of current students. Now, and that's by surveying students, say, are you interested in competing in these sports? If so, we'll pull you all together and see if the interest is there on show up, and then you demonstrate you have the ability to compete. If you can do that and show that there are no needs, then you're in compliance. There's only two competitive sports that we would have competition within a 200-mile radius that we would have to consider. One is tennis, and the other is golf for women. All the other sports that are out there either don't exist in our conference or don't exist within the colleges within a 200-mile radius. All right, so the OCR sent a team of 2 individuals on campus on May 5th of 2010, and they conducted 2 days of interviews with the athletic director, with coaches, to athletic administrators, to the president, to student athletes. They picked samples of students from each of the teams and talked to them about their experience and whether they were really competing or whether they were just on the roster or whatever the case was. And then they went away. And I was waiting for a letter indicating whether we are compliant or whether we are not compliant. That's their job. And I clarified that with the investigators before they left. I said, let me understand this. Your job is to tell us whether we're in compliance or non-compliant. And they said yes. And I said, if we're not in compliance, then our job is to create a compliance plan, which we had done 18 years prior to that. And he said, that's correct. Well, all the communication we had for the next 12 to 18 months was, all you have to do is bring back tennis and we'll go away. Well, that was not an option for me, because I want to know whether we are in compliance or not. And maybe bringing back tennis wasn't the best option for us at that time. Maybe it would be to consider creating a golf program. Or maybe it was better creating greater numbers through a different kind of methodology of attracting student athletes to the college. Maybe it was capping men's sports to not be able to let them grow to the point they were. There are other strategies that we were not being allowed to introduce into the conversation. So we played attorney to attorney phone tag for 18 months, almost 2 years. And then they just kind of disappeared. We didn't hear anything. Finally, in August of 2012, we got a request from OCR to supply updated information about participation of our student athletes. So Bob Mariucci put together the numbers that we report every year through our federal reporting guidelines, sent those off in September to OCR, and we've been waiting again since September. And so finally we got the letter. And the letter was a very good letter, because it basically said that, says, Dear Gil, oops, there it went again. And it just goes into the background of, on January 19th, 2010, they received the complaints. And it kind of traced down all of it talks about what they do for investigating Title IX. They talk about the legal standard. They talk about the policy and interpretation of how student athletes are considered participants, what kind of benefits do they have to achieve or receive. Talked about the 1979 interpretation. So a lot of this is kind of boilerplate as part of the letters of concern. And then they get into the facts. All right, and so the information that they requested from us was from the 2011-2012 academic year. And since we had been a college that had used the participation method of determining compliance, we submitted our information and they ran the numbers. And if you see in this paragraph under facts, the first thing they do is they look at the ratio of male and female full-time students. And for that particular year, we had 53% of our full-time students were male and 47% were female. When they looked at the participants, the 280 varsity athletes that were participating in athletics, 51% were male and 49% were women. So what's the underrepresented gender in this particular snapshot? It's the men, isn't it? All right, so whereas in 08-09 it was the women. And this is something you need to understand. This vacillates year by year based on just the number of interests by students, how many students are finishing in one year and being replaced by another group of students. So you can't always just take one snapshot and say it's like this forever, But this is what they're basing their information on. So in the old interpretation, if we were within 3% of being exactly proportional, that would say that's good enough. But now they've introduced something called substantial proportionality. And this is where this little math lesson comes into play. And I love this part of it because that's what I get all excited about. See? So what they do, first of all, they say, okay, if you were to be in exact proportionality, how many students are you short? Student athletes are you short in that gender? So they do the calculation, and it turns out we would need 157 male athletes to be in complete proportionality. How many did we have? 143. So how many were we short? Boy, I smell something burning. Okay. So we were short 14, all right? So then what they do is they say, okay, is that good or bad? So the next thing they do is they calculate the average team size for that underrepresented genders. They took all the male athletes, divide by the number of men's sports, and they get a number. In this particular case, the number was 20. That means the average men's team size had 20 student athletes. If this shortfall is less than 20, it means that the need is not as great as the average team size. Therefore, you're in compliance. If that would have been 24, they would say you have a greater need than one team could accommodate. Therefore, you need to add more accommodation for that underrepresented gender. And then you could become in compliance. And they would tell us you need to bring those numbers up. So in this particular case, we fell below that threshold. So what that meant then, so they went through the calculation of the 20, and then they finally got to the conclusion after doing all of that. And so they concluded that there was insufficient evidence to support a conclusion of noncompliance with regard to the issue investigated. Therefore, OCR was closing the case. Yeah, now you could interpret that good or you could interpret that bad. You know, the good part is that finally, after 3.5 years, we finally got some closure on that particular issue. Okay. The bad part is it leaves a question about, are we still adequately accommodating student interest in and opportunities within our intercollegiate athletic program? Watching to see what's happened across the state and the number of colleges in their budget reduction plans, how many sports have been eliminated during this process, I'm very, very pleased the fact that we did not do that during this time. I also, during our program elimination, program reduction time, I made it very clear that while we were still under investigation, we were not going to make any movement in that because we didn't know how that would jeopardize our program. But anyway, we were very pleased to see that the action taken by OCR recognized the work that I know Bob and his coaches have done in terms of really thinking compliance as we put together our policies within our athletic program. All right, so any questions on that? Is that clear? Now, there's going to be a news release going out. Shannon, is that going out today? Yeah. We've been working on a news release. We kind of wanted to stagger it from the accreditation part, but it'll be coming out also because there's been a lot of public interest in this. Yes?
Hi, so you were saying that the school didn't necessarily do anything, it just kind of let it lie, and it happened at the OCR.
Yeah, go ahead and ask the question again. So we pick it up on the soundtrack.
Hi, this is Grace Hunsinger from the Questonian. I was just wondering, you're saying that the school didn't actually specifically do anything, you just let the numbers kind of happen?
No, we did a lot. We invoked caps on men's sports because there's a tendency to attract more student athletes on the men's side. Plus, what we learned during this process that was very different than it was 18 years ago is that normally we would consider the team or the squad as being what we submitted for the eligibility list. Okay. But what the interpretation of the 96 interpretation by OCR is that anybody that's listed on the roster, the class roster, whether they're eligible to compete or not, are receiving some benefits. They're receiving coaching, they're receiving access to use of facilities, and therefore they have to be counted in the mix. And so we put caps on men's sports. So instead of carrying 45 on our baseball class list, there's a maximum level of 28 or 30 or something of that sort. And it was more on the men's side that we saw the non-competing students on the roster because many of them had already used their eligibility, but they were planning on going into coaching or whatever, and therefore they wanted to monitor and be part of the process to learn more about what their particular profession might be. So, okay. We also increased a more conscious effort of recruiting women athletes also. So rather than just open the door and let them walk in, there was a more concerted effort to go out and start doing more active recruitment. Okay. All right, let's move on to the long-term budget reduction plan. If you recall, in our long-term budget reduction plan response, we estimated that in 5 years, with just two approximately 2% increase in revenue, that at the rate of salary, schedule servicing, the rate of increase for things such as workers' comp and other automatics, utilities, et cetera, we would be about $8 million out of compliance in 5 years, or out of balance in 5 years. And so what we chose to do in our budget reduction plan is to prorate that over 5 years, which means that we would need to structurally change our expenditure side by $1.6 million each year. So if we take and structurally change our expenditures by $1.6 million for 13-14, then that is a reduction that stays there forever, and that's how we achieve the $8 million. So even though we weren't having to cut our budget because we were getting a shortfall of money, we were cutting it up front, or we are cutting it up front in order to take us for the long haul. All right, so then we take $1.6 million and we have to divide that into two parts. And this is because of a complicated law called the 50% law, where in California, 50% of your general fund expenditures has to be in the classroom, primarily in faculty salaries. And the other 50% can be used to support all of that, classified employees, management, operations, etc. So it's a fine line and a balance of making sure you satisfy the 50% law. So we divided up this 1.6 million challenge into two parts, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was the academic side, and I took that recommendation to the board in December, and that had to do with the program elimination and modification, of which involved the removal of some whole programs and drastically modifying several other programs. And we're very close to the $800,000 target that we had in that area. We're still sorting out some of the final tunes. Phase 2 was another $800,000 that I'm in the process of getting ready to take to the board on April 10th. I made a presentation to Planning and Budget this week to show what my proposal was at this point and how we were going to achieve that. And I just want to share that with you today. Okay, so we had a target of $800,000 in order to achieve. So I met with my executive staff and I gave an assignment. I gave a target for each of the areas. My office, which encompasses the President's office, the Board of Trustees, research, and marketing communication, and the foundation, had a $100,000 target. Tony Summer, the Vice President of Administrative Services, had a $400,000 target. And then each of the other two vice presidents for academic affairs and student services each had a $150,000 target. And so they've been working on, and we've been working independently and collectively on how we're going to achieve that. So I gave this report Tuesday to Planning and Budget. In my particular area, we're going to achieve that in two areas. Marketing communications will contribute $10,000 to this, and the bulk of this will come from board elections. Because we're changing the way in which trustees are going to be elected in the future, starting in 2014. Normally, it costs us about $200,000 every time we do a board election, because we have to pay for all of the precincts within the entire county. And what we're moving, whether you have 2 people running or 3 people running, which happens every even year. What's happened now, the board has just approved a plan to go through an election by district only. So there are 5 supervisorial districts in the county. We've adopted those districts as our own. And so in 2014, Trustee Mullen will be up for election, and Trustee Alexander will be up for election. So that's the South District and the Central District. The only people that can vote for those trustees are in those 2 districts. So we will only have to pay for 2/5 of the county electorate at that point. So it allows us to reduce this ongoing cost that we have substantially. And so we're contributing that, because that's a structural change that will that will be permanent. In the area of the Vice President of Administrative Services, they receive the bulk of the challenge of making the changes, but you can see they come everywhere from the Vice President's office, computer services, facilities, fiscal services, bookstore, human resources. But then also, we recognize that we have an opportunity to offset some of the need to cut structurally by increasing revenue. And this revenue isn't necessarily goes back to that unit. This is institutional revenue, which offsets the degree to which we have to cut. So we'll be moving towards making increases in these particular areas. Convenience fee is the credit card usage fee. So when you run a transaction on a credit card, the students paying for fees and so on, there's a charge for that use. We're increasing that convenience fee charge. That's a proposed. We've increased the non-resident tuition. That'll yield about $150,000 this next year. We're revising the fee schedule for the use of facilities, the rental of facilities, which will generate another $11,000. And then the student fees for summer are going to be increased, and motorcycles year-round. Those haven't been touched for a long, long time. And the last time we did the increase a couple of years ago, those were not affected at all. And so we're working through this. I know the presentation being made to students, making sure they're aware of it. I know Jordan is aware of that process, but that will be a recommendation that will be placed in there. In the area of Vice President of Academic Affairs, some of what you'll see will be proposed, because some is subject to negotiation with our faculty union, or which subject to negotiation with our classified union. Not necessarily doing it, but the effects of doing it. Okay. So because we have reduced or we are eliminating our culinary arts program, we don't need to rent the Culinary Arts Academy studio in Paso Robles. So we save about $20,000 in that area. Dual mileage is a contract relationship with faculty who have assignments on one location on a certain part of the week, other location on another part of the week, and that's in the contract that's been there a long time. We're proposing it be eliminated. In the personnel area, I will be making some recommendations on classified staff reductions. And this particular staff reduction was really a fallout of Phase 1. In Phase 1, and one of the program adjustments was to eliminate or reduce the amount of classified staff supporting that area. Right now we have a division chair position that's vacant due to retirement. Our plan is not to replace that, but to reshuffle the deck and redistribute the academic programs in a different manner. And then under contract, the North County campus qualifies for a North County coordinator in a specific discipline if there's a certain number of full-time equivalent faculty in that discipline. Well, because of the reductions that we've done, there are two disciplines for which that eligibility is now not met. So we'll be eliminating those two opportunities. And student services, we're renegotiating our lease with Luciamar School District for the use of facilities, primarily because we're offering fewer classes and we have less need for facilities. We found in one account we had still quite a sizable money on a line item account for temporary help. So Sandy McLaughlin has recommended that we pull the bulk of that out into the reduction plan. And then there's a few across the board for $5,000. We are going to be recommending to do a reshuffling of positions within student services. It affects about 5 positions and about 3 individuals, which will save about $65,000 when all the smoke clears. And we'll be talking more. We try not to be too specific because we have people involved and we also have unions to work with through that process. And then there's a proposal to increase the transcript fee, which hasn't been done for quite a while. I think it's from, what, $5.25 to $6, is that correct? Yeah. So that will also generate additional income. So bottom line is we hit the $800,000 based on this preliminary proposal. We're going to be working on the next month or so on fine-tuning tuning this, and then taking the final recommendation of the board on April 10th. So that's where we are on that. And if we now satisfy Phase 1, Phase 2, and these are permanent changes now. These are structural changes. This is not just a one-time. But the thing I wanted to make sure, since many of you are either in management or classified service that are here today, there's no proposal to do a furlough program for 13-14. So it's my intent to restore salaries back to the previous year starting July 1st, both for management and also for classified employees who have faced the bulk of the impact of a lot of the reductions. And that's why you don't see it anywhere in this proposal. So with that, timeline, April 10th, the board has to, the May revise of the governor's proposed budget will come out the middle of May. That'll allow us to see how accurate our projections are towards what the governor is thinking about. It's really kind of nebulous and fuzzy right now. So this could morph in many different ways. Then the board has to approve a tentative budget in June, and then the final budget in September. So they have to approve a tentative budget in June so we can start writing checks and paying people on July 1st. So that's good. Okay. Any questions? Thank you for your attention, and stay tuned.